Good afternoon. I'm Luke Robinson, Web Manager at Calvin College, and I'd like to welcome you to the January Series 2006 of Calvin College. Please join me in a moment of prayer. Heavenly Father and gracious God, thank you for bringing us together today. We thank you for this college and this community. We are grateful for the countless learning opportunities, riddles, and mysteries you provide us through your creation. May we begin each new day with a sense of responsibility towards you, Lord. May our labors discover truth and breed wisdom to aid the Holy Spirit's work in renewing all things. Please give a special blessing to our guest this afternoon. Give him clarity of thought, words of truth and grace, and safety as he travels. And now, in your name we pray, amen. Oops. And now, Earl Fife, Professor of Mathematics and Statistics, will introduce our guest.
Dr. Eugene Stafford has been at the forefront of information security for a number of years, both nationally and internationally. He's spawned businesses, he's testified before Congress, he's advised presidents, he's currently the founder and director of one of the nation's leading information security centers. His stature within the computer security community has even surpassed the single name recognition. He's gotten to the level of single syllable recognition. If you say SPAF, they know who you mean. Calvin College is grateful to J.C. Heisinger for underwriting today's presentation. Please welcome Eugene Stafford.
Thank you all. Well, thank you, and I am certainly impressed by the turnout today. I'm very pleased to be speaking to you about the state of information security and somewhat as to why you're on your own, in large part, dealing with security. To start off with, I'll give you a very brief snapshot of where things are. We are currently dealing with a massive overload of vulnerabilities in the computing systems and networks that we use on a regular basis. In each of the years 2003 and 2004, there were about 4,000 vulnerabilities reported in commonly used software that required patching or countermeasures to be deployed. And in 2005, the number went up to 4,600 vulnerabilities in commonly deployed software. That's an incredible number. New ones right now, this year, are being reported at the rate of about 20 per day for commonly used systems. Now, what's particularly distressing to me as an instructor is that about 3/4 of those flaws, those vulnerabilities, are simple design flaws that, had students been paying attention in the introductory courses where we normally teach about how to avoid these things, they wouldn't have happened. And yet, they're there, they're finding their way into commercially and widely deployed platforms, operating systems, database systems, network systems. In addition to that, we're dealing with this very significant onslaught of programmed malicious entities, viruses, worms, and other things with names like that. Currently, there are over 120,000 known different varieties of these, and the major vendors are reporting that they are receiving copies of new ones from around the world at a rate of over 50 new ones per day. So that's better than 2 per hour. That is, in particular, one reason why, as I'll mention later, antivirus software needs to be updated on a regular basis, where regular now means approximately every 20 minutes if we're going to keep up. Large-scale attacks on infrastructure, on major organizations, are doubling per year. By large-scale attacks, I mean it isn't a case of someone trying to probe into an individual machine. It's someone launching an attack against all the machines, or the majority of machines, at a government agency, at a major company, or at a college or university. The damages from all of this are often hidden because they're either not discovered or not reported, or they result in damages in lost time, productivity that isn't easily quantified. Computer viruses alone are believed to be causing over $60 billion a year in losses worldwide, using some estimates for downtime and lost information and files. The worldwide losses for all forms of computer crime and abuse rolled up together are currently estimated at well in excess of $100 billion a year. One analyst made some minor headlines last month by announcing this figure and saying that by the best estimates of law enforcement, the losses for computer crime currently exceed the total profit from all illegal narcotics sales worldwide. And for those of you who work with computing, it may be more addictive as well. We're seeing other kinds of problems that are hidden damage. And an example that I'll give is spam, unwanted email. At some of the major ISPs, the internet service providers, and the companies you can think of are the big ones like AOL and Earthlink, but there are also many of the smaller ones. But they're reporting that over 90% of their email transiting their sites is spam. Now, the cost there, you see some as the end user because it occupies disk space and your time and aggravation. But another cost that you don't see is that the ISPs have to build out exceptional additional capacity to handle all of that spam email, all of that network traffic. And they're not doing it for free. They're ending up charging all of us to be able to afford that extra capacity. So there's a hidden cost that we have to deal with. Organized crime is increasing. There are increasing elements of criminal activity online involved in fraud, extortion, identity theft, and others. In fact, identity theft is the #1 crime right now in the United States in terms of growth. We are seeing an identity theft occur on the order of once every 90 seconds. So during the course of my talk, by the law of averages, there are 5 or 6 of you who are going to have your identity stolen while you're sitting here listening to me. Not my fault, but last year, the number of online users connected to the internet exceeded 1 billion people worldwide. And by the year 2015, that will increase to 2 billion, with the majority of that growth currently occurring in Asia. That's a lot of people. And out of all those people, there is a significant number of them who are not going to be necessarily honest and law-abiding. Current trends, just if you plot out the growth of viruses, the growth of attacks, you can see those curves are not gentle slopes, but rather precipitous and have been over time. They are not showing any signs of letting up. Rather than spend a lot of time talking about statistics, I really wanted to focus in a little bit on some of the why, because when we look at the problems of computer crime and abuse, the question is, well, why is it like that, and what can we do to try to make things better? That's really the thrust of my comments. One of the biggest problems we have right now is that the basic designs that we're operating from are unsound. And part of that is because the vendors are constantly adding new features, many of which we don't need, and they're increasing the size and capacity of the platforms. So your average home now is equipped with a system that has speed and connectivity far in excess of what's really needed, and is often used to host spyware, viruses, robot attack software that the home user isn't even aware is there. The majority of you, probably with home systems that are connected up to the network, have this software installed on your system running, and you don't even know that it's there because it hides itself. The experiments that have been repeated over and over at various parts in the country have shown that someone taking a brand new Windows machine and hooking it up to the network, it will take approximately 5 to 10 minutes to download all the patches to bring the security up to date. But likewise, on average, within 15 seconds, your machine will be invaded and taken over by the software that will prevent the patches from being fully installed, and you'll never notice the difference. Because most of that software runs in the background. It doesn't affect you locally. You've got lots of extra capacity. And it's that little bit of extra background capacity that is used by the software, by the attackers, to spread out the sending of spam or the attacking of machines. The equipment we're using now is not based on secure design principles, because secure design principles require extra time and expense to build in, and vendors have not found a reason to spend that extra time and expense. People don't want to pay for it. The software that we use in many places is coded by untrained personnel, because people with well-qualified degrees are more expensive to hire. The systems are provided with confusing and unnecessary options, and I'm certain that many of you have had the frustrating experience of trying to configure to run new software or get your network to work in a new environment, and trying to navigate through all the menus and understand all the error codes to make things work is very, very difficult. The inconsistent configurations that change from time to time, and then there's the forced revenue cycles. The way that software is currently sold for many of these companies, for them to be able to have a continued revenue stream, they need to introduce new revisions of their product every few years, or possibly every few months. And that requires them to actually make significant extensions and changes to the software so that people will want to buy the new products. But all of those new features added, and added quickly, by the way, so that they can get it to market, add unnecessary complexity where new problems tend to lie. So there were a number of features as to why the design of the systems we use don't make sense. And part of it has to go with what protection is in place. I found this picture. This is the way most businesses and government agencies view security. They figure that the vendor of the hedge will take care of the rest. It doesn't really work very well. So the operation of these systems, once we get them, is unsafe, and we have developed a culture of patching where we are used to the idea that we have to apply patches on a regular basis. Imagine if every week or every month you had to take your car and your VCR and your microwave into the store to have yet another problem fixed. And in between, on the weeks where you didn't have the system in for patching, or because maybe you were a few days late, there was a possibility that it might explode. That's effectively what we've now grown to accept for our software products. We have an overly homogeneous environment, so as soon as one problem appears, it sweeps through 80 or 90% of all systems with very little to stop it. We have grown incredibly accepting of failures. I'm aware of very few other product areas where we will tolerate so many abysmal failures quietly and treat it as a matter of course. In particular, what I see in military systems, there are regularly attacks and successful attacks where people are getting into military systems either for political purposes or criminal purposes, sometimes absconding with data or altering the systems, and it's just treated as, oh, it's another attack. If it was a physical case where people were actually wandering into military bases and walking out with file drawers full of information, it would be in the newspapers, there would be criminal charges, there would be court-martials, and there would be public outcry. Now it's often buried on the third page of a trade magazine because it's so common and it's so tolerated. We also have the myth of general purpose, that it's better to buy a system that does everything rather than one that is focused on a particular set of needs. And we have the myth of the perimeter, the idea that if only we install guards at the site, the network edge, that will be sufficient. But where is the inside of a network that has wireless connectivity and people roaming about with laptops? So we have a number of problems here where the operational environment simply doesn't match the way we use systems. I mentioned the culture of patching, and I've mentioned this in front of some crowds, and people say, well, what's wrong with patches? Well, there are several things wrong with patches. Yeah, I know it's a cheap shot, but imagine if you are the system administrator of a system and you have to keep up with all of those patches. If you are dealing with 5,000 patches a year and you're maintaining even a few dozen systems, let alone a few thousand, the overhead, the difficulty, the conflicts between different software versions, the ability to get everything put in and in place is just, it's stupefying, really. And in many places, they simply cannot manage to keep up with all the patches. What I have on the right is a picture of a real ISP wiring center. Do you think they understand how it actually works? That's one of the problems with patching. After a while, you no longer know what you've got connected, and you are more likely to disconnect something or cause a new problem by installing a patch rather than fixing an old one. We have a problem with insufficient expertise in the field. Information security, InfoSec or cybersecurity requires much more really than simply a computer science background. And there are certainly not enough educational programs in the country or the world to satisfy the need. Woeful lack of support for R&D, research and development, that is used to build the educational programs and the solutions we need. Many people believing that hacking expertise, the ability to break into a system, is equivalent to the expertise necessary to protect it. And without going into detail there, I can simply tell you that probably any of you can easily go out and break a crystal vase, but how many of you can make one? Very, very different skill sets. And of course, the work overload for the people who do have the training and are involved. So the question is, with all these problems, who can we depend on to help fix it? I think that's an interesting question to ask. And so one of the first questions is, well, can we depend on the vendors? You know, it should be in their best interest. We're paying them money. They should be the ones who are going to fix the systems. Well, just look at anything in the headlines. So, for instance, there's something in the news right now called the WMF law, the Windows Media File Flaw, that is led to already several million machines being invaded with software. Simply by opening a picture is all it's necessary in mail or on the web. And the problem is growing, and Microsoft is telling everyone, well, just wait till next week and we'll have a patch. We're also 3 years into their publicly announced security push, where they vowed that they were no longer going to allow these kinds of flaws to occur. 3 years, and this flaw is based on one of those simple design flaws I was talking about with failure to check arguments. Or even worse, in some respects, you may have read about the Sony DRM flaw, where people buying Sony audio discs found when they inserted them into their PC to listen, it secretly installed software that enabled attackers to take advantage of the system. Sony was doing this to prevent their CDs from being copied, but didn't inform the user that they were installing software that was the equivalent of a rootkit hiding package. And then after it was exposed, claimed that it really wasn't going to be a problem because who knew what a rootkit was anyhow? They've had several lawsuits filed against them. They've now become a little bit more contrite. But nonetheless, this is one of the vendors that is actually actively working against security for you because they're protecting their own interests, not yours. Your local law enforcement? This is not intended in any way to ridicule local law enforcement. They are very hardworking individuals, but their level of technical expertise is more accurately captured by this picture. More than half of the law enforcement agencies in the United States have 12 or few sworn officers. They don't have the resources. They don't have the training, the equipment, or the time to go out and investigate computer crimes, and they're your primary means of defense. Most of the problems actually are originating either at a national level or an international level. So your local police officer is not going to be able to initiate an investigation into network traffic from Chechnya that's coming into your machine. It's beyond them. And federal law enforcement also doesn't have the resources. Your system has got somebody coming in from Chechnya. Okay, can you show that you've had at least $100,000 worth of losses? Unless you can show at least $100,000 worth of losses, the FBI will thank you for the information and will not talk to you again, because it doesn't rise above the threshold that's important to them. They don't have the manpower. The problems here are many. Law enforcement is simply not well equipped to deal with it at the current state. And of course, talking to my friends in law enforcement, many of them who were working computer crime have been pulled off to hunt for terrorists, and quite cynically, they don't believe there are any that they're looking for, but that's what they've been assigned to do. And they're no longer looking for computer crime, organized crime, or other kinds of incidents. So there's a priority issue there. How about DHS? We've all heard a lot about DHS. Homeland Security. Well, certainly our computer systems for our banks and our power and our homes, those must be important to protect, right? Well, here's a report that was issued by the General Accountability Office in May. And the first sentence is, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security has failed to fulfill the cybersecurity responsibilities it has been assigned since its creation in January 2003, according to a government report released Thursday. They've completely missed the boat as far as being proactive in this regard. An assistant secretary position was created 6 months ago and still hasn't been filled. Another way of looking at this, DHS has a research budget of $1.3 billion to look into any kind of threats to Homeland Security. Less than 1% of that is devoted to cyber. And of that, less than 1%, which comes out to be $16 million. It was $17 million last year, 16 this year, so it's actually decreasing. Of that 16 million, only 2 million is actually devoted to research. The rest is to acquisition. DHS is spending more right now to ensure that you don't take a pair of fingernail clippers on planes than they are in protecting computer networks in the United States. Which do you think is the bigger threat? How about the Department of Defense? We have a lot of people in uniform. We're spending a lot of money on them. We certainly turn to them to help protect us. I could have put up 30 or 40 articles here. I just picked 2, and both of them by a reporter who has covered this area. These may be related. The details have been largely classified, so they're not easily determined. But there's been an ongoing series of attacks that appear to be coming from China. There is a term that's been used to refer to it called Titan Rain. If you go out and do a web search, you can probably find other articles. But the networks have been constantly under attack, and many of them penetrated. At least 2 Army bases were so thoroughly compromised that they had to shut down their systems, and in one case, they threw out all of their computer systems and replaced them at a cost of about $46 million because they couldn't clean them out. And 3 weeks later, they were infested again. Our Department of Defense isn't winning this battle. Other federal agencies, well, rather than give you a slide on each, how about a report card here that was provided by the Inspector Generals? And this was a report that was provided to Congress where they were graded on how well they were meeting basic information security. This isn't even sophisticated. This is just the simple basics for getting password changing and patching and antivirus in place. Look at all the F's. Department of Commerce, Department of Agriculture, Department of Energy. That happens to be the agency that's managing our nuclear weapons and research programs. I don't feel good about them getting an F. The Department of Homeland Security at the bottom. The question is, well, don't they know there's a problem? Well, yes. I was a member of a group called the President's Information Technology Advisory Committee, and one of the reports that we produced and delivered to the President and to other members of the government in February was entitled Cybersecurity, A Crisis of Prioritization. And I think the title captured a lot. We went out and spent nearly a year gathering information about the state of cybersecurity in the government and out in industry. And we provided in the report a set of recommendations and observations about how important it was to start looking at the issues. And as a direct result of that report, or maybe it wasn't a direct result, but it certainly seemed to be, the President dissolved the committee, and only one of the 4 recommendations has even been considered. In fact, funding for cybersecurity has been cut. So it didn't really make much of an impression. We were told when we started the report, we went in and we talked to a congressional staffer and said, you know, this isn't something new. We went back and we found and we cited in the report 35 previous reports by Blue Ribbon Commissions and National Academy reports on the problem with cybersecurity. And the staffer said to us, well, congratulations on doing number 36. That was not one of the better days for that. One of the things that we came up with in that report and in the observations is that we need more balance in research, because right now, most of the investment is going into fixing near-term problems. We are constantly spending money on that patch cycle and on viruses. And we've been doing that same thing now for 5 or 6 or 10 years. What we aren't doing is investing in the long-term research for the field to actually find how is it that we're going to have better systems, the systems after next. If we don't do that, we're just going to continue using the same systems and having the same problems and be spending yet more money fixing the same kinds of problems. Albert Einstein said that insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. The current thinking is really insane. We also need a greater investment in law enforcement. Remember I mentioned about how overwhelmed they were? What we found when we looked at the federal funding is that the total investment government-wide for new tools to help law enforcement investigate computer crime was on the order of $5 million for the whole government. It's just not a priority. If we look at funding for all of computing, and most of the funding in cybersecurity research goes through National Science Foundation. SISE is the Computer and Information Sciences and Engineering Directorate at NSF. If you look at this in dollars adjusted for inflation, it's been going down every year for quite some time. And this year it went down yet again in real dollars. So certainly we're not seeing funding going into the research for computing in general, which is really quite interesting. If you look at even federal projections, this is where the careers are. Don't believe some of those stories about offshoring, because we're still going to have a big growth in jobs in computing. It's really about the only area that's going to show significant growth. These are from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. The funding is so out of balance with the problem, it's amazing. If you look at the reported US losses from various kinds of problems, which is in the potentially $80 billion range, you look at the US market for computing, and then you look at the funded research, and we clearly have a problem here, in that the losses far, far outweigh what it would cost to possibly make a difference. Question is, of course, what do we have Congress doing about this? Well, this article came out 2 days ago. Federal spending and R&D drops. You may read that there's more money going to research this year, but 97% of it is going to research into new weapons and to manned spaceflight. Of the remaining 3%, half of that is going into new medical care. In real dollars, the money that's going into any kind of research that might be involved in cybersecurity is either staying the same or dropping. Another thing, of course, I can't help but mention, the entertainment industry makes a lot of noise about how their copyrights are being infringed, and they are. but the result has been a passage of a series of laws. One of the most notable is something called the DMCA, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. It is currently illegal for me to do research on methods of investigating computer viruses and hacking tools, because the research that I would do could also be applied to how to get around copyright protection on CDs. And Congress passed a law that said that any research like that is illegal. Doesn't matter why I'm doing it. And yes, it's extremely unlikely that any of my friends at the Justice Department are going to prosecute me, because they do know that I'm on their side, at least most of the time. But Congress added the additional provision that any one of the record companies or movie producers or anyone else who produces content has an independent right to sue me, if they should so choose, simply for doing research into those tools. So several of us in the field no longer do research in computer forensic tools, because it's not worth the risk of being sued by Sony or Disney or any of the other groups who are particularly aggressive about this. So don't expect a lot of help from there. So the situation, as I classify it, is dire, but not hopeless. I certainly don't want to leave you with the impression that, oh my gosh, I'm going to go home and throw out my computer system and never bother with it again, because that's certainly not my purpose. Computing has many, many great possibilities. There are many things that we can do with it, and we have to find some ways to be able to succeed. And this brings me back really to the basic idea of this talk, which is we are going to have to practice some self-defense. Each of us is going to have to learn some things and do some things to help protect ourselves. And I've tried to come up with a list of some easy things that could be done. I'll get to the list in a moment, but first let me say there are some points of light, I hope. I'll use my group at Purdue as an example, but there is a small community of researchers who are working in this field, despite the fact that we don't have enough funding or support. We are trying to work in this area. 10 years ago, when I first testified to Congress on the issue of information security, I noted that nationally we were producing about 3 PhDs a year. Well, I was happy to report this year at Christmas time that my group at Purdue alone produced 13 PhDs. So that's good news, that's growth. That's 20% of the US output of PhDs in information security. So figure about 60 to 75 PhDs a year, compared to 45,000 MBAs and 75,000 lawyers. I'm not going to draw any particular conclusions from that. I'll leave that up to you. But the numbers are far too small to deal with the problem. But that's about the best that we can manage based on the number of students we have coming in and the number going out. The center at Purdue is one of the oldest and largest in the world, and the center proper gets no support from any government program at all. It's all based on donations from industry. That's the only way that we're able to go on. That's the way most of the centers around the country are proceeding. But we're sticking with it. As someone observed to me earlier this year, he was pleased to see that I was continuing even though the windmills are getting larger, for those of you who get that reference. We also have a number of professional and commercial associations that are very involved in trying to raise awareness and make a difference. The Computer Security Industry Association is an example. And we do have people in government who get it. There are people in Congress, there are people in the administration who do get it. But it's difficult to argue the priorities, because there are lots of other groups who claim that their problem is dire and urgent and immediate and necessary. And it's difficult to point to an incident in computer security that has captured everybody's attention so totally that they agree that, yes, indeed, this is a big problem. And that's a difficulty. Most of the losses that we're suffering are small and persistent and repeated. The steady flood of viruses means they hardly ever make the newspapers anymore. The steady flood of hacking attacks and spam is so constant, people hardly notice it. You can be conditioned to accept a lot. Mark Twain said that the way you boil a frog is you don't throw a frog in a pot of hot water because it'll jump out again. You put it in a pot of cold water and slowly increase the heat. And that's happened to us in the computing realm. We have grown to accept a greater level of really terrible behavior and poor performance by gradually having the heat turned up. I would ask how many of you have gotten to the point where if you get a blue screen, you just kind of sigh and accept it and go on. You've been conditioned to accept it. It's no longer something unusual. But we do have people in government who get it. Increasing public awareness that there is a problem is one of the big issues. And that's really a lot of behind what I'm speaking to here. I'm attempting to bring the word to the masses that we have a problem, and we have to face up to the problem, and we have to start telling people about it. So to get back to this question about what can you do as individuals? What are things that you can do that will make a difference? Well, the first and foremost is keep your software up to date. What we see now is this constant barrage of flaws being announced and discovered and attacks being crafted for those flaws. Then the attacks are widely circulated, and those organizations that don't put the flaws in place, or those individuals that don't put the flaws into place, become victims. So it's important to get those flaws fixed as quickly as possible so you don't become a victim. Well, the next question is, how do you go about doing that? The vendors have gone to automatic patch mechanisms now for many of the large systems. They use the network to query back to their servers to find out if there's a patch available, and if so, it downloads it and updates the system. Don't disable that. It's an important feature. Of course, if you don't have a good network connection, that's very difficult to download the patches. But if you don't have the network connection, you're also not likely to be the recipient of some of the problem software that may come across. Second thing is, think about security when you buy. When you go out to get your next computer or your next software program, pause a little bit and ask yourself, how is the security on this system? How is it going to protect what I need to do? So, for example, there is one very popular commercial operating system produced by a company that has had a record of, as I noted, over 120,000 computer viruses for their products reported so far. There is another vendor with a much smaller market share during that same time period that has had a total of only 40 computer viruses, and none in the last 2 years. I'm running that second vendor's. I'm not going to recommend it necessarily as an example, but it is possible to build systems that are much more resistant to these problems. You might want to think about those. If you're running a business, ask yourself, how much are you spending on a regular basis in licensing, software security, antivirus, patching, patch management, intrusion detection? And how big a help desk group do you have to keep it all up to date? It's fairly expensive, although it's a cost that you don't see up front. If you purchased a system that might cost a little more at the time you purchased it, but saved you 2/3 of that operational cost in the long term, wouldn't that be worthwhile? Well, certainly if you're in a business, that makes sense. Interestingly, the way government systems are purchased, The operational costs are decoupled from the acquisition costs. So the only thing that counts is who has the low bid at the acquisition. We got to get out of that kind of thinking. And certainly you can as individuals and as people running businesses. There are alternatives. There are many different systems. And one of the problems we have is that we have not exercised market pressure very well to get vendors to pay attention and actually devote more resources and more care and attention to what they're doing, to maybe starting offering higher quality systems as opposed to ones with more features. Third, if you're not currently deploying antivirus and firewall tools and other basic security mechanisms, you really should. You should not be operating a machine that is connected up to any network without antivirus. You shouldn't be receiving email from lots of people without antivirus. I know that sounds suspiciously like you shouldn't venture outside without a flu shot. It really isn't that different. It's a matter of public health. That, yes, maybe you don't have behavior that you think is going to put you at risk, and maybe you don't have anything on your system you're terribly worried about, but you're part of a population. And that population, particularly when I'm talking about those machines at home that can be taken over unseen and used as part of a criminal enterprise, you're part of that population. So it is, in effect, a civic duty to protect yourself. It's like exercising due care with your tires when you have a car. Yes, you may drive carefully, but you have to worry about the other people on the road as well. So get a good antivirus program and update it regularly. Most of the commercial products now download, when necessary, new virus definition files. Firewalls, if you don't know what a firewall is, that's something that you ought to ask your ISP about, or your college, or your IT manager. Most systems, as they're shipped, have too many things turned on that are exploitable by outsiders. A firewall is a mechanism you put on the network to help isolate your machine and to prevent people on the outside from gaining access to those services. Now, a reasonable person might ask, well, why the heck don't the vendors simply turn those services off? And being occasionally accused of being reasonable, I've asked vendors that question. And the response that they've given me is that it's because you, the user population, cost them too much. When they ship systems with those services turned off, people don't bother to read the instructions, and instead they call up the customer service line and say, my computer's broken. And for every one of those phone calls that they get, they lose a little bit of money. And they found out through experiment that if they shipped systems with services turned off, they ended up losing money on the sales. So they ship them with everything turned on because then they don't get complaints. We have to turn that around and complain when they start shipping us things that are turned with the services turned on because they're not safe. In the meantime, a firewall is important. And I didn't put it here, but the same is true with wireless networks. You install a wireless hub at home, make sure it's got a password on it so that somebody out in your driveway or your next door neighbor can't get onto your network and plant things or use your network for their own purposes, unless that's really your intent. For some people, that may be a matter of philosophy. They want to do that. I have told some law enforcement audiences, and this may not be good for me, but my neighbor, very nice man, doctor who's not home a lot, he has a wireless hub. And I've tried to convince him to put a password on his wireless hub, but he said it's too much trouble. Well, I use his wireless network on occasion when mine's down. So maybe I'm not trying as hard as I might, but if I was a little bit more malicious in intent, I could be out downloading credit card numbers and porn and pirated music, and I could be downloading it onto his machine because he also doesn't have all the patches in place. You know, I tell stories like this, and I don't get invited back a lot of places. But what would happen is that there is no evidence on his system or his network that it was me doing it from next door. So when the police show up with a warrant because he's been breaking into government systems and downloading credit card information and loading kiddie porn onto his machine, and they find it all on his machine, there's no evidence that he'll be able to come up with as a defense that I was doing it, because there's nothing there. That's a worst case. And no, I'm not going to do that. I actually like him. He keeps his lawn cut and doesn't throw too much over the fence. But for those of you with a wireless connection, make sure that you have it configured with a password so that your neighbors or somebody driving by on the street can't simply turn on their computer and hook up to your network. If you don't know how to do it, I know it hurts, but pull out the manual, take a look. I've noticed that's particularly a guy thing. We don't want to read the directions. If you're somebody whose VCR is still flashing 12, get a neighbor to help. It's something you can do that's important. Fourth, if you get an email that looks like it's too good to be true, it is too good to be true. So for instance, something that says, I'm the second son of the deposed prince of Zaire. I have $50 million in an account. If only you'll give me your bank information, I'll be happy to share the money with you. Yeah. Well, you may say, this is so obviously fraudulent. Why am I getting it? And why am I getting it 3 and 4 and 10 times a day? Well, the answer is because there are people that fall for it. There are regular cases of people who believe these stories and end up giving their account information to whoever's sending the letters out, and then they end up being defrauded in a major way. Their accounts are emptied. These are called 419 scams, and 419 is the section of the Nigerian criminal code that this violates, because the majority of these originally started coming out of Nigeria. Now the majority of them appear to be coming out of the Netherlands because of the laws there. Many of the organized crime gangs have moved, set up shop in the Netherlands, and current Dutch law doesn't allow them to shut them down without some very compelling evidence. Don't respond to those. Another kind of solicitation you may get in the email is something that looks like it's from eBay or PayPal or Amazon or your bank that says, this is your third notice, or we've noticed unusual activity on your account. Please click on the link below and fill in the information to help us update your account. It looks like it came from those places, but it isn't. Don't ever click on a link in email you get unless you are absolutely 100% certain, because of cryptographic signatures or something else, or somebody told you they were sending it to you, to believe that that link is correct. Because what you see on the screen is not necessarily what you're clicking through to. And those things that look like they're Amazon sites or PayPal sites or your bank sites that are collecting your name, your social security number, your credit card number, your verification code, whatever else you're putting in, are being run by somebody probably in Chechnya or South Africa or Nigeria or possibly down the street, and they're collecting all that information together for identity theft and credit card theft. And it's happening on a regular basis. The criminal activity that I'm referring to is called phishing, P-H-I-S-H, phishing with a P-H. And it's a very common activity. Again, if you've been getting the fraud letters, you've probably been getting these bogus phishing letters because the people committing the crimes share their address lists. If they find an easy mark or they find an email address that works, they send lots of junk to you in hopes that you'll fall for one of them. It's a real problem. If you do online banking, If you go to Amazon, don't use a link that somebody sends you. If you think there's a problem, manually type the link in yourself in the web browser, or use one of your own saved bookmarks. Don't use what's in the mail. Fifth, let others know about your concerns. If I've raised your paranoia just a little bit here, share that with others. If I've raised your paranoia a lot, share that with your medical professional. That wasn't my intent, actually, to make you terribly paranoid. But I want you to exercise a little bit of caution and awareness about some of the difficulties, and share this with other people. You've taken the time to come here and listen to me patiently. If you take some of this away, go back and share that with your neighbors. Share that with others. If a company sends you email and says, here's an update on your account, click on the link below to see it, contact customer service and tell them that you won't do that because that's a common method of fraud, of phishing, and they shouldn't do it either. That if they need to contact you, they should send you a paper letter with information about what you need to do, or provide a means for you to call back to a known telephone number. If somebody came up to you on the street and said, I'm with your bank, there's a problem with your account, I want you to fill out this 3x5 card with all your personal information, I doubt you'd do it. But that's what's happening online. And what we have to do is convince the legitimate businesses not to send people up to you on the street with a 3x5 card saying, please fill this out. That isn't how they do business in the real world. They shouldn't do that electronically. So share your concerns with them. Share your concerns with your elected representatives, your state representatives, your federal representatives. Your federal representative from here is a friend of science and understands the issues, but not everybody does in Congress. Have your relatives, have your other individuals you come in contact with, contact their representatives and say you're concerned about information security and would like to see some attention focused there. Read your credit card and bank statements very carefully. Most people get the statements and then proceed to pay the amount, or generally at this time of year, the minimum amount, and don't really go through carefully and reconcile the charges against what they thought they paid. That has been shown time and again to be the case for the majority of people. And yet, when you have credit card fraud that occurs, it starts off small. What happens is when credit card theft occurs, where someone gets a credit card number that maybe for your account, it's being sold on the internet somewhere, that it's been captured, whoever buys it will make a small purchase first, generally from a gasoline pump that's connected up to the credit card system, to make sure that the card is valid and hasn't been shut off yet. So if you see on your bill a $10 or $15 purchase at a gas station, don't immediately assume that you did it. Think back and be sure that it really was a charge, because otherwise you may find a real surprise in next month's bill. The ads that were on TV a while back that were really interesting, where one person would be speaking, but it would be a voice of somebody obviously very different, about going off to Aruba and buying watches and getting plastic surgery, and it was an ad for a company's protection against credit card fraud. That's basically what happens. If they validate that your card is valid, they will wait until after the statement cycle and then make lots of charges, because it'll be another month before you discover them unless they hit the credit limit. So it's important that every month you look at those charges, and if you see something out of place, immediately call the bank. And educate yourself about security. There are a lot of people who are intimidated about computers. You don't need to be. Think of them as cranky typewriters or cranky filing cabinets of a sort. There are some good books, there are some websites, there is information out there. Don't avoid it simply because you think, oh, that's too complicated, because it won't go away. We have a national tendency that when something looks like it's going to be too expensive or too difficult, we avoid it. And what then ends up happening is the pain when the problems occur is much worse. So spend a little time, read the articles as they happen, and understand a little bit more, especially if you're going to use the computing. It's like learning the rules of the road or learning any other kind of information about being safe where you travel. Understanding education is going to be one of your best defenses. Most of all, be suspicious. If you saw some of the articles in the newspaper about the Wikipedia problem, where Wikipedia is a wonderful resource that people like myself can visit and edit and create pages for free as an encyclopedia for people to use. But it also means that I can enter totally bogus information, as can anybody else who has a particular agenda. And it all looks good. It's got fancy graphics, a nice typeset, and it's got a great URL, but it's bogus. Simply because it's on the net doesn't mean it's valid. In fact, some of the best quality, nicest looking web pages I've seen are from the people who recount stories about how they've been abducted by UFOs. Well, maybe they have, and that's where they learn the web design. The fact that you can find it online doesn't mean it's true. Here's some URLs for starting points if you want to do some education, if you want to do some online browsing. The first URL is where you can go and get a copy of the PTAC report on cybersecurity for free. You can download it and print it, or view it on screen, or order a printed copy. It's produced by a government advisory agency using your tax dollars, and you're entitled to a copy. And I encourage you to take a look at it. We wrote it so that it would be generally accessible. Second URL is for my research center. When I say my, it's really our research center. There's about 80 faculty at Purdue who are involved with this, and about another 30 faculty around the country who are associated with this. We have links there to K through 12 education, community education, other groups. There's a lot of material. Some of it's probably more technical than you want, but it's a good place to start. USACM. ACM is the oldest of the professional computing organizations. It's been around since 1946, I believe, is the year, and has about 80,000 members worldwide. It's a not-for-profit, nonpartisan, scientific and technical organization, and it has a U.S. Public Policy and Education Committee, which coincidentally I'm chair of. And we do a lot where we try to educate the public, and in particular policymakers, about some of the consequences of technology and the decisions they make regarding technology. We have a number of links and information resources there. You might want to look at it. And then the last, the Computing Research Association, another organization primarily of research universities, put together a Grand Challenges Conference to talk about what the challenges are to security. What is it we really need to do this research on? Here I've been talking about what are some of the, that we don't have enough support for research, and you might ask yourself, well, the computers work, the networks work, what do I need to do research on? If you visit this website, there's a video of the presentation of the outbrief of the conference that came up with 4 grand challenges that we don't know how to solve currently, but are really important for society. And there will shortly be a printed report that summarizes that video briefing. All of these are available for free for download. There are other resources that are linked to them. There are books at bookstores. I know the faculty here at Calvin who work in computer science are also interested in these topics and can very probably help you find resources. I'd like to leave you with the hopeful note that as with any problem, it takes a while for people to get aware of it. We have good people working on the problems. Your knowledge is going to help you persevere. I don't think we're headed for a true catastrophe, but times may be a little rough. I really appreciate the opportunity to come to talk to all of you today. I wish you safe computing and a wonderful 2006. Thank you very much.
Once again, we'd like to thank Dr. Eugene Stafford for speaking with us. He'll be available in the West lobby for, to answer questions and just to greet you. Thank you again for coming.